How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a shootout of some sort of mid-range torque wrenches specifically for working on bikes. Now, obviously a torque wrench is an important tool if you're working on a bicycle, especially if you're working on sort of higher end carbon fiber components where you really need to have a precise torque applied in order to make sure that it doesn't slip if it's too low of a torque spec, or to make sure that it doesn't break if the torque spec is exceeded. And so a torque wrench is really an important tool in order to make sure that you keep your components not broken and working the way they should. Today we're gonna be looking at the sort of mid-range category. We're looking at between $50 on the low end to about $120 on the high end. Now, obviously $120 is a lot of money for a tool that you're gonna use relatively sporadically, but this is a pretty important tool to make sure that everything is installed properly on your bike. So we're gonna try to figure out whether you need to spend $70 more than the cheapest torque wrench in our test today. And we'll be comparing some of the more popular torque wrenches that people tend to recommend for working on bikes specifically. So we'll try to figure out whether or not you need to go with the established brand or you can go with a more up and coming brand. So today we're gonna do a couple things. First, we're going to introduce all the competitors in just a minute here. Then we're gonna head over to my workbench and I'll give you some sort of close-up shots of all the torque wrenches. I'll talk you through how they work, tell you some things I like about them, some things I don't like about them. And then I'll give you some information on some tests I ran on the torque wrenches with regards to their accuracy, the loudness of their clicks, and stuff like that. And then we'll come back here and I'll give you my recommendation for which torque wrench is best in this mid-range category. All right, so let's meet the competitors in today's torque wrench shootout. Starting off at the low end, the cheapest torque wrench in this test, we have the Vibrelli, which comes in at $49.99. The Vibrelli has a range of 2 to 20 Newton meters, and it comes with a hard plastic storage case as well as some additional bits. You get some hex bits and some torque bits for the $49.99. Next up, we have the Toppeak Nano Torque Stick. This does retail for about $119, but it seems like it's being phased out, so you can find it for about $89, $88 pretty regularly now. This one goes from 2 to 10 Newton meters, and it doesn't come with a hard plastic storage case, but it has this sort of like pen holder, and this pen holder comes with some additional bits, and then the torque wrench is over here. It's one of the smaller torque wrenches in the test today. There is a larger version, the regular Toppeak torque stick. That one has a range of 2 to 20 Newton meters. This is the smaller Nano. Next up, we have the industry standard Park Tool TW 5.2. This is the smaller of two torque wrenches in Park Tool's click type torque wrench lineup. This one goes from 2 to 14 Newton meters, and it sells for about $90. And finally, we have the Feedback Sports Range torque wrench, which has been getting a lot of attention recently. It's a newer addition to the market. A lot of people really like it, and a few reviewers have actually said that this is a better option than the Park Tool, which has sort of been the industry standard for a long time. We're gonna try to figure out whether or not that's actually the case. This also has a range of 2 to 14 meters like the Park Tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and head on over to my workbench. We're gonna take a look at all 4 of these torque wrenches in a little bit more detail. We'll go over some basic facts about them. We'll talk about the results of the testing. Then I'll come back here and give you my recommendations for which of these torque wrenches are worth your hard-earned money. All right, so now let's take a look at these 4 torque wrenches in our sort of prosumer kind of value category and try to figure out which one is the best based on a few different categories, as well as just some general observations that I have. So let's start off with our cheapest torque wrench, the Vibrelli. So the Vibrelli comes in this hard plastic storage case. It feels pretty solid, a little bit cheaper than the other ones, but it should protect the wrench just fine. And the Vibrelli does come with some hex bits included. So you have a full set of 2 through 10, including 2.5, which is really nice. And then you have a T10, T25, and T30 torques, as well as an extension bar. And then here you have the torque wrench itself. Now, the torque wrench is relatively small, relatively compact, okay? You have a 1/4-inch drive head over here. You push over here to release the socket. You have a reverse knob on the back here. And to set the torque, you have a range of 2 to 20 Newton meters. And all you do is you pull back on this release knob here. You twist the dial. So 0.5 would be a 0.5 Newton meter. So now you're at 2.5. You let go of the dial, it'll snap back up, torque what you need to torque, it'll click, and you're good. So overall impressions, Vibrelli feels pretty solid. You know, it definitely does feel a little bit cheaper than the other ones, I have to say. The knurling on the handle isn't super sharp, so, you know, you don't have a ton of grip on it. I don't know if that really matters, but, you know, it just does feel a little bit cheaper than the other wrenches in this test. But that being said, you know, everything really works as it should. You know, when you let go of the release knob, it springs back up like it should. This has a nice kind of weight to it. The turning of the handle feels good, clicks nicely. Right, everything feels relatively well made. I do think it punches above its weight, especially for the $50 price range. This is a pretty good option, I have to say. All right, next up we have the Toppeak Torque Stick Nano, as seen here. Now, the Toppeak does not come with a case, actually. It just comes with this sort of like pen holder, if you will. I don't know what to call this, but basically it clicks into here, okay? And this doesn't have any sort of attachment to put it on like a workbench. It's really just meant to be like stored like this. So you do miss out on any sort of protective storage, which is a little bit annoying, I have to say. But this little holder is kind of cool in that you hold the torque wrench here, and then on the back, you can slide out. I always forget which way it goes, this way. You can slide this out, and then you have these included bits, which are held in here magnetically. So you can kind of pry one out. So you can sort of pry one out like this, use it, and then it just clicks back into place with the magnet. And it actually feels pretty solid, the magnet. You know, like these aren't bouncing out at all. Now, this is kind of a cool feature. I mean, it does hold these bits in here and you have easy access to them, but I would have preferred a hard plastic case to keep the torque wrench a little bit more protected, especially for the price of, you know, $119 MSRP, although often found for about 80 or 90. I would expect a hard storage case for that price. But the wrench itself looks like this. It's really nice and compact. It has a ratcheting head, and you change it like this by twisting the gold piece. Okay, so that goes in one direction, and this goes in the other, like so. You actually don't have a 1/4-inch drive, you have a hex insert here. So basically, you would use just a standard bit in here or something to convert from a standard bit to a 1/4-inch head. Okay, but basically this creates a much more compact package and much shorter package overall. And then you have a range of 2 to 10 Newton meters, and basically you just pull down and twist this knob here, and when you come back around, that's 1 whole Newton meter. Okay, so we're at 3 right now, go all the way around, that's 4, clicks into place, has sort of a positive detent here at this setting, but you can go, you know, a 1/4 of the way around if you wanted to. So I can go to here and it'll, you know, it will click in at a 1/4 of the way. And then on the back, you have a marking for 0.5. So for, you know, 4.5 or whatever, you'd be right there. Okay. And yeah, you have this little yellow marker, which you line up with the correct torque that you want over here. It does have an open sort of spring right here, which worries me maybe a little bit. See if I can get that to focus. So you can see the spring here, which is actually what creates the whole, you know, click type torque wrench mechanism. So I don't know if over time stuff would get in it and sort of gunk it up, especially since you don't have a storage case. So that is a little bit of a concern of mine. Although I guess if you keep it in a different case or, you know, somewhere protected, it should be okay. But it is a small concern of mine that this window is just open and stuff could get into right here where the spring is. But all in all, a nice little package, feels good in the hand, super high quality, all sort of aluminum. It feels really premium. And you can definitely tell that you're getting more compared to the Vibrelli in terms of fit and finish and just sort of the way it's been thought out. All right, moving on to our industry standard, the Park Tool TW 5.2 comes in a hard plastic case. And this case is definitely the highest quality in this test. Here you have the wrench. Now, the Park Tool is unique in that it is the only wrench that has a 3/8 drive head. This is kind of an annoyance for me because most socket sets, hex socket sets that are especially as small as like 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, they're going to be in 1/4 inch drives. So you need to put on an adapter in order to use the 1/4 inch drive sockets, which is kind of annoying. Park Tool does sell their own socket set, but it's much more expensive than what you can get from like Naco or Tecton, which are good brands in their own right. And that kind of annoys me. It feels like they're trying to lock you in to use the Park Tool sockets. You don't really need a 3/8 inch drive for something that only goes up to 14 Newton meters, right? Yeah, if you're going up to 40 Newton meters for bottom brackets, then yes, give me a 3/8 inch drive head. But for 14 Newton meters and less, 1/4 inch drive is all you need, and this kind of makes it a little bit bulkier than it has to be, I have to say. Push to release button here to release the socket. Have the reversible switch here on the back. You have a scale here that converts from inch pounds to Newton meters, which is nice. And then to set the torque, you have this little window right here with a red line. And you can see here it goes even numbers, 2, 4, 6. And if you push this little knob here and then you twist it, you can go to your desired torque spec. Once you let go, it pops back out. So here we're at 6 and 1.2, so 7.2. Now, again, another kind of gripe here is that you don't have whole numbers here. So let's say you want to set 5 Newton meters, right? So you go to your 4, which is like right there, right? Or right there would be 4. Okay, we're set at 4. And then you want 5. Well, you'd think you just find the 1 here, but there is no 1. So you have to go between 0.8 and 1.2, which, isn't the most complicated thing in the world, but it's a little annoying. I feel like they could have found a way to just make this, 1.5 whatever, or 1.25, 0.5, so on and so forth. So that is just a little bit annoying in my opinion for the price. Again, you're paying about $90. This is the industry standard. You would think they would have thought that out maybe just a little bit better, in my opinion. All in all, it does feel like a solid tool. The handle is plastic, which I don't love, but it does feel like high quality plastic. That being said, okay, this is all covered, which is great, right? So there's no way for anything to get into where the actual spring is. So that's really good, right? Unlike the Toppeak. And it's, it's a well thought out tool, I think, just with a few minor annoyances like the 3/8, the lack of, 1 integer increments over here on the bottom. And as we'll see in a later test, the click is really rather quiet. That's the click. That's it. And as you can hear, or you can't hear, it's very, very quiet. So that's a bit of a gripe for me. But all in all, this is sort of the industry standard for a reason. You can send it back for calibration. It is very accurate, and it is rather ergonomic. So this is the sort of current king of the prosumer or even professional torque wrenches. Let's see if the feedback can dethrone it. All right, and then finally we have the Feedback Sports. Now, this also does not come with a hard plastic case, rather opting for this sort of tool wrap here. And you also have this Velcro. Then here you have the tool. As you can see, it comes with a full set of bits, standard bits, as well as 3 extended length bits. And then you have the wrench right here. And here it is. Now, the feedback definitely does feel very solid and premium. You have a reversible ratcheting head, you can see here. Like the Toppeak, you have a hex head rather than a 1/4 inch head. So for standard bits, which again, it comes with. You have a similar sort of setup to the Toppeak again, where you have an open spring, which again is not my favorite, especially because this one's open on both sides. So I don't know how durable that's going to be in the long run if stuff's going to get in there. I mean, you do have something to keep it protected, so that does help, but a little bit of concern on my part from that design perspective. But basically all you do is you just twist the silver knob here, and then you'll see a silver sort of bar, I guess, right? And it's going to go up as you twist this, as you can see here. That's right now set at about 5-ish Newton meters. You have the evens on this side, the odds on the other side, and here we are right about 5 Newton meters. Now, it's really easy to adjust, right? Nice positive clicks all the way through. My one gripe with this would be that it's kind of hard to tell what you're actually at, right? So for example, like, does 5 mean that the silver thing is right below the 5? Does it mean that it's like even with the 5? Does it mean that you're a little bit, right? Like, I don't know exactly what 5 on the dot is. So that is a little bit annoying. I think it would have been nice to have some sort of marking exactly where you need to line it up for it to actually be at the right torque setting. But all in all, it's easy to adjust. The feeling is nice and solid. You get a good click. Let me set this down a little bit so I can actually click it with my hand. You get a pretty nice click, and it just feels really solid. It's definitely smaller than the Park tool. So, you know, for some that's a pro, for some that's a con, but it definitely is a more compact tool. Has a really compact head, so you can get in some tight spaces. Maybe not quite as compact as the Toppeak, but rather compact as a whole. And it really just does feel good. It feels like a solid tool, right? It's $120, but you are getting this plus all of these bits, which feel also pretty premium. So it does feel like a pretty good value in terms of what you're getting for this torque wrench. And a lot of people say that this is a better option than the Park tool. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a few moments here as to whether or not I believe that. All right, so now let's do some scoring here to figure out which ones are the best objectively speaking. Let's start off with the case. Now, in terms of cases, I would go like this. The Park tool takes the win in first place, followed by the Vibrelli, followed by the Feedback, with the Toppeak in last place, okay? The Toppeak doesn't actually come with a hard case. As we saw, it has that little kind of carrying, you know, whatever, which makes it sort of hard to make sure this stays completely safe and separate from your other tools. The Feedback tool wrap is nice, but it just doesn't have the, you know, the capacity to protect the wrench like a hard plastic case would. Vibrelli and Park tool both have hard plastic cases. The Park tool one just does feel a little bit more solid than the Vibrelli, so I'll give maximum points to the Park tool. So in terms of size and compactness, the Feedback is going to take the cake here at the smallest, although it's pretty close between the Toppeak and the Feedback. First place here. Third place goes to the Vibrelli, and then Park tool is the bulkiest, and the sort of large head because of the 3/8" drive doesn't help it in this regard as well. For weight, in last place, we have the Park tool at 281.3 grams. In third place, we have the Vibrelli at, if it wants to stay. In third place, Vibrelli at 262.6 grams. In second place, we have the Feedback at 148.5 grams. And taking the win is the Toppeak at 127.7 grams, by far the lightest in the test. With regards to the ability to get into tight to reach spaces, I would organize them like this. The Toppeak takes the cake because it just has a little bit of a smaller head than the Feedback. And even though it has this kind of ratcheting head, which I guess the Feedback does too, it is able to really get nice and close to whatever it needs to. And the Toppeak takes the win in this category. It was the only one able to complete my hard to torque bolt test, which I will show right now. The Feedback was rather close in doing so, but just has a little bit of a bulkier head and wasn't able to complete it, but both of these are pretty good in that regard. The Vibrelli also has a relatively impressive size in terms of the head. You're able to get into some pretty tight spaces, but it's just a little bit bulkier than the two winners. Park tool is by far the bulkiest with the biggest head, making it hard to get into really tight to reach spaces. Click volume can be important to know when you're actually at the proper torque. The Park tool takes in last place, being very quiet, right? That's a click. You can't hear anything, right? So being very quiet. The Park tool averaged 68 decibels between the various clicks we did for the test. In third place, we have the Toppeak, which registered 72 decibels on average, which is satisfactorily loud. In second place, the Feedback averaged 73 decibels. And the winner in the click volume test was the Vibrelli at 77 decibels, which is quite a bit more than the competition. Now, in terms of accuracy, this is how they stacked up. The Vibrelli was fourth place with an average error of 10.76% away from its tested value. So we tested all these torque wrenches at 3 Newton meters, 5 Newton meters, and 10 Newton meters. 30 times each, and then we basically calculated how far away from that setting each one was using our little torque tester seen here. Now, again, this is probably not the pinnacle of testing accuracy. It was about $40, and most, high quality testers are about $400, but it should give us good relative information at the very least. And with the information gained from this guy here, again, the Vibrelli came in last place, but still relatively accurate across all settings. It struggled just a little bit at 3 Newton meters. The Park tool just edged out the Vibrelli in total accuracy, scoring 10.02% average error. And it was pretty consistent across all of the different settings. So it definitely is accurate. But the Toppeak was actually more accurate than the Park tool using this test in this specific testing format at an average of 9.29% average error. And then the winner in the accuracy test, and it actually came in near the top or at the top of all 3 different categories, was the feedback, with an average error of 8.30%, beating out the competition. And it was also impressively accurate at the low settings, like 3 Newton meters, which is definitely harder for a torque wrench to do than anything near the middle of its range. So in terms of accuracy, this is how I would organize them. The Vibrelli in 4th place, followed by the Park tool, Toppeak, and then feedback. And then the final category we have here is more subjective, build quality. I would go with a pretty similar sort of lineup here. The Vibrelli definitely feels the cheapest of the bunch, although it definitely doesn't feel cheap, I would say. It feels pretty solid for the price. The handle feels maybe a little bit cheap. This kind of stopper here that protects where you would adjust it, right? Has a gasket on here, but it's a little bit loose, kind of rattles around. So you're definitely not getting sort of the most high-end build out of these 4 torque wrenches. The Park tool does have a high build quality. It does feel premium. I don't love the plastic handle, but I do think the fact that everything is completely covered and protected is a big benefit over the other 2. So maybe longevity would be better on the Park tool. But in terms of initial build quality, I'd probably give it to the other 2 over the Park tool, just because this plastic, it doesn't feel like cheap plastic, but it still is plastic instead of metal, which I think would feel a little bit more premium. The Toppeak has really great build quality. It feels light without feeling cheap. The handle, the adjustment knob, all feels really good, right? It clicks into place solidly. The dial to show you the actual torque setting is nice and visible. It seems well built. Again, I do have some concerns about the durability of it, given the fact that it has this sort of open spring design, but time will tell. The teeth on the ratchet feel really fine. The reverse mechanism feels really well built. This one just feels really, really great. And the winner in build quality is the feedback. It just feels a little bit higher quality than the Toppeak, although honestly, they're really, really close. Everything feels well built. The machining is nice and precise. Everything just looks high quality, premium. The knob here to adjust the torque has a really solid feel to it, right? Nice positive clicks. The window here, it's a little bit confusing to read, if you will, but it is easy to read, if that makes sense, I guess, right? Like you can see it pretty easily. You don't have to squint too much. I like the fact that they have the even and the odd numbers, so you can exactly tell what you're aiming for at the very least. And everything just feels well built and sort of polished. So it does feel like a very well built tool. The Feedback Sports just takes the win in terms of build quality.
Okay, so with all of that being covered, let's talk about which of these torque wrenches I would recommend. So they're all pretty accurate, although there is definitely an obvious difference between sort of the top 2, the Toppeak and the Feedback, and the Park tool and the Vibrelli. Now, like I said, they're all accurate enough, right? I don't think you're gonna break anything or have anything slip by using these torque wrenches. I've owned the Park tool personally for about 4 years now. I've never had any issue with any component I've installed with it, even though the lack of an audible click does annoy me. It still does reach the proper torque spec. So they all do the job properly. I think the Vibrelli is obviously the best buy for the money, right? It $50, it's less than half the price of most of these other ones. It comes with the included bits. It's accurate enough. The fit and finish is good, it's solid. right? The Vibrelli, I think, is a really good option. And I think if you're comparing it to these torque wrenches in this kind of higher range, I think it makes a lot of sense. For 50 bucks, you can save your money and spend money on something else. However, I do think you do get more by spending more. The Toppeak, the Feedback, and the Park Tool definitely have a higher build quality than the Vibrelli, although I do think the Park Tool feels a little bit cheapened by the fact that it has that plastic handle. The Toppeak and the Feedback really do feel like the highest quality tools in the test. The Toppeak is really impressive. It's really compact, so for getting into tight to reach spaces, it's probably the best out of the bunch here, although the lack of a hard plastic case does annoy me a little bit. I do think a hard plastic case is really important for a torque wrench, since it does need to be sort of babied to make sure it doesn't get tossed around, because they can get out of calibration by being dropped. But the Toppeak is a joy to use. It has a ratcheting head on a very small body. It goes from 2 to 10 Newton meters, which is enough for most things. You know, going above 10 is useful for a couple components, but most things are in that 4 to 6, 4 to 7 Newton meter range. So the Toppeak is a really great option. However, if you are going to be paying full price for the Toppeak at 120, I would probably go with the Feedback. You do get those extra 4 Newton meters of range. The fit and finish, like I said, it's about a toss-up for both of them. They're both really good. I think the Feedback looks a little bit more refined than the Toppeak, but they both, like I said, look really solid for the price. But I do think that the bits you get with the Toppeak are higher quality. You get more of them. I prefer the tool wrap rather the sort of pen holder for the Toppeak. So I think between those two, I would probably go Feedback, but they're both excellent options. Now, what about the Park Tool, the industry standard? Well, I think for the home use, I would probably go with one of the other two, honestly. The Park Tool's good, it does the job, but there are a couple annoyances about it, right? A, plastic handle does feel a little cheap for something that costs $90. Secondly, the lack of actual 1 Newton meter increments on the dial is a little annoying. You can obviously figure it out because you have to go between 0.8 and 1.2 to get to 1 more Newton meter, right? Because it goes 2, 4, 6, 8 on the range. So if you want to go 3, you can't just turn the dial to 1 when you're at 2 and have 3. You have to go between 0.8 and 1.2, which is a little annoying. Again, not a real big deal breaker, but I think they could have probably figured out a way to make it just single number increments. But I think the biggest gripe I have with the Park Tool is the lack of an audible click. Park Tool does say this is normal for it to not have a loud click, but I can't really hear a click, right? What I would call a click at all. It does sort of cam out and make a little bit of a noise when the handle releases tension, but it's not really a click. Again, if you're working in a quiet garage, it's probably not a big deal. But if you're working in a loud, a bike shop or something like that, that might be sort of a deal breaker. Torque wrenches don't actually stop you from going further, they just tell you when to stop, but you can still keep applying force and over torque something. So the lack of that audible click is pretty annoying in my opinion for the Park Tool. Now, however, to be fair to the Park Tool, I do think one thing does give it an advantage over the Feedback as well as the other ones here, is that the Park Tool does come with calibration services. You can send it back to Park Tool, pay a fee, and they'll recalibrate it for you. Torque wrenches need to be recalibrated after, they say, about 5,000 clicks, right? After being used 5,000 different times. If you're working in a bike shop, you're gonna go through 5,000 clicks pretty quickly, right? Especially if you're working on a high volume of bikes. And so for someone working in a bike shop for sort of the industry, I can see why the Park Tool is still the standard, right? With those calibration services, with the hard plastic case. It's meant for professional use, and I do understand that. The Feedback doesn't offer calibration services. And so I think that is a big drawback on the Feedback for professional use. For home use, I really do think the Feedback does beat out the Park Tool, but I probably wouldn't see it in a bike shop. Now, like I said, at home, you're probably not going to reach 5,000 clicks very quickly. And so the lack of calibration services offered by Feedback is not a huge deal breaker in my opinion, but it is something to be aware of, especially if you have a lot of bikes or plan to do a lot of work with it. If you're working in a bike shop, I would probably lean towards a torque wrench that does offer some sort of calibration services, which the Park Tool does. To wrap things up, which one's the best purchase? Well, they're all good. Kind of depends on how much you want to spend. I think if I had to choose out of these 4, if I had to choose one for me to keep as my personal torque wrench, again, for my use in my garage, working on a few different bikes, but definitely not a professional, I'd go with the Feedback. However, I think you'd be happy with any of these 4 torque wrenches as long as you understand the limitations of each one and why you might choose one over the other. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it helped you make a more informed decision when buying a new torque wrench. Let me know down below if you have any comments on any of these torque wrenches, any questions about any of the torque wrenches, or if there's any other torque wrenches you would have liked to have seen in this test or that should be considered at this price range. Please let us know down below. I'd appreciate it greatly. So as usual, thank you for watching the video. I hope it was useful. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. It would greatly help me out. As always, again, thank you so much. Catch you guys in the next one. See you later.